What's the good word, y'all? It's your boy DKB here. I wanted to dive into a bit of a scouting breakdown for one of our preseason standouts in wide receiver Brandon Smith, who broke out onto the scene. 2 huge plays led by Adrian Martinez to Brandon Smith to help us pull out the win over the Commanders in our first preseason game. And it got me thinking, do we have a potential hidden gem here? Right now, it's preseason action. There's vanilla defenses, a whole laundry list of issues you can get into for why you don't want to overvalue what you're seeing even in a preseason game. But still, it stood out that Adrian Martinez seemed to have trusted Brandon Smith enough. Keep in mind, one of those plays were essentially double coverage. The other one was just a great ball by Adrian Martinez, finding him on a play that was breaking down. But still, it's nice to know what you may have in the clip when you want to talk about future ammunition for the New York Jets, right? So let's take a look at what we have here. Brandon Smith now originally started his career out of Iowa, and he's only been with the Jets, mind you, for a couple weeks, potentially about a month or so now, coming in at 6'1" and 220 pounds. I want to emphasize the 6'1" because I've seen a lot of places that have placed him at 6'2", 6'3", maybe even 6'4"-ish. He's 6'1". Now he definitely plays much bigger than that, and 6'1" is still incredible height in the NFL. But still, let's not get over eccentric, with the physical measurements here. Former 3-star recruit, as mentioned, began his college career at Iowa, completed his 4 years there, ended up going undrafted in the 2021 NFL draft class, was picked up by the Cowboys, didn't make it through roster cuts, ended up playing with the Arizona Cardinals as well sometime later as another undrafted free agent signing, right? But he's essentially spent the majority of his last 2 years with the XFL DC Defenders. And one of the things to make note of is this isn't his only big preseason performance. He's racked up just over 200-ish yards or so and a couple of touchdowns between his time with the Cowboys, with the Cardinals, and then he's been able to rack up a solid enough career with the DC Defenders while he's working on improving some of his traits and abilities, right? Primarily was used as a boundary receiver in college. He's been getting moved inside a little bit more when you take a look at what the Cowboys in Arizona has tried to do with them, and then even with the DC Defenders. And one of the things that intrigued me about his time with the Defenders, not necessarily from a good standpoint, is that the head coach was looking for him to be their number one option within that offense. That didn't happen. He still ended up being a significant portion, but it feels like his ceiling is going to be a lot lower than what you would like based on the physical traits that we'll get into here. But nonetheless, just something to keep in mind. He didn't rise to the occasion at the XFL level, so temper things no matter what we're seeing again in these preseason games. Has dealt with some shoulder and knee injuries, the knee going back to about 2019, the shoulder being more recent in the XFL. But overall, he's had a pretty clean bill of health for what he's asked to do in the style of play that he brings. And Iowa did highlight, I've seen some comments surrounding like the coaching staff and interviews and stuff that came up where he came to Iowa with a lot of bad habits in terms of practice, effort, etc. From what I saw, they were ultimately able to coach a lot, if not all of that, out of him. But something to keep in mind, he's been raw at a lot of these destinations, and one thing for sure that Iowa does a really great job at is discipline and its technique. So he comes in as a little bit more of a polished guy. He's just kind of limited by what he's been asked to do and some of the opportunities that he has or hasn't had, right? Keep in mind, Iowa, a strong run team, and they also haven't had a great quarterback since, or at least one that they trusted having the ball in their hands a ton with since what was the last good Iowa quarterback? I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. I wanted to say Josh Allen, but I believe he was Wyoming. So nonetheless, just keep that in mind. Run-oriented offense at Iowa, lack of opportunities due to QB play, and then things aren't going to get better as he's progressed from the Cowboys to the Cardinals to the XFL level. One of the pieces that should be a highlight for him going into this is that he has a former background as a high jump track athlete. I believe he's won some medals as it pertains to that part of his athletic background as well. And it explains a ton about the player comp for him essentially being Jason Brownlee, right? I wouldn't say that's his ceiling or anything. Of course, this Jason Brownlee hasn't even done a ton, if much at all in the league. But you're essentially looking at a carbon copy of that same exact player when it comes to what they do well and some things that they're going to need to work on. So some of the benefits of having Brandon Smith in the offense: he can win off the release. He can maintain separation throughout his route just using his length. This is a guy that has sneaky NFL speed, right? You hear that term a lot, and the best way to describe it is when you look on tape, if he can beat you in the beginning of the route, half a step, full step, doesn't have to be anything crazy, you're rarely going to be able to, catch up to him and drag him down, right? Maybe in the vicinity, if you are, you can catch him, but if he has you cleanly beat, you're not just catching up to Brandon Smith in terms of being a general overall athlete at the college level. And that's something that does come as a bit more of a positive to me on this 6'1", 220-ish pound frame. Jump ball, back shoulder throws, all of those are going to be his forte, right? And this is where it gets into that Brownlee comp portion, where he's not going to beat you by separating easily and being a nuanced route runner. He's going to use his length. He's going to use his frame. He can high point balls. He can catch things outside of his frame, and he'll put some crazy looking catches on tape. You just wish that those came easily, right? It's great to have some of those difficult ones, but you want to be a guy that can also make your job as easy as possible for your quarterback. Now, solid footwork off the line of scrimmage. He's not shifty. He's not agile in any shape, form, or fashion, but he does have a few solid moves he can use to avoid press coverage techniques, or even guys that aren't using press. They're just getting a close alignment to him, and then they're looking to bail out. He has a little bit of a shimmy step that he can do. I even seen it during, I want to say it was the preseason game this week, and he ended up running back into the defender, even though it worked well for him. But still, something to keep in mind. He can snatch balls outside of his frame, as we mentioned. He has very, very good body control. It's not on a Garrett Wilson level or anything, but this is a guy that can definitely contort himself to give himself the best possible chance at least making a catch if there's a difficult window, an errant throw, etc., etc. And keep in mind, the quarterback play from Iowa and other stops he's been at hasn't been great, so there's been a ton of practice with him having to adjust his frame to go out there and pull something in that probably could have been a lot more easy. Solid blocking ability. We'll get into a little bit more of that as well, but just know the effort level is there. The general framework for having the technique is there, and that's going to be a plus for him. Attacks the ball aggressively. Some of the things that I tend to hate is when you have a taller 6'6" plus frame guy and they end up playing more so like they're 5'10", right? They don't utilize all of the natural advantages that they have. That's not going to be a problem with Brandon Smith. He can go out there and he'll make sure if he's within a foot of a guy, he can make it feel like he's a yard plus ahead, behind, aside from a guy, whatever that is to you, in order to give his quarterback a chance, right? Strong enough to beat press coverage. I won't say he consistently uses that to his advantage, but it's definitely there on tape. He's not a guy that you're just going to jam up because he's playing lackadaisical. So pretty big plus there. Overall, some of the opportunities within his game. Now, he's had 6 or so drops and about 90 to 100-ish targets over his 4 years with Iowa. So not a bad ratio by any means. Not the best one either, but I'm thinking from NFL standards, right? When you have, the Brandon Ayuk's or the DeAndre Hopkins of the world, DeAndre Hopkins of the world, but still pretty solid considering a lot of his targets that he's getting are going to be in contested catch situations. little to no yak ability. So this reverts back to the fact that there's not a lot of agility in his game, not a lot of shiftiness by any means. He's just going to go out there and be a grown man in his routes and make stuff happen, right? So it's not going to look sexy by any means, but he's going to get the job done. Inability to break tackles, he reminds me a ton of like Tyler Conklin, for example, in that regard, where at least in Conklin's case, it looks like he has enough wiggle to make things happen. It's just a frame of mind that he's in. Whereas with Brandon Smith, it's not his bread and butter. Every once in a blue moon, you may see him do something that shakes a guy up. But for the most part, he's going to catch his ball, try to secure it, and then he's going to tumble his way to a couple extra yards if he can. Doesn't sustain blocks consistently, so when it does come to his blocking efforts, you love everything about the first couple seconds. I will say he doesn't always sustain blocks, and you've seen that in the preseason as well. When we got in the red zone package, he was able to get his guy squared up pretty well and tried to pin him to the line of scrimmage, let a guy get outside of his shoulder, and he was able to go in and make a tackle. And I want to say it was against Braylon Allen for a short. I think it was a tackle for loss, actually. He'll allow some passes into his frame. He's generally a hands catcher, in my opinion, but still in situations where you're not expecting like a sliding, catch or anything of that kind of sort. There's a couple of those balls where you like to see him make sure he can still go out there and extend and go and snatch that ball. And then one of the last pieces, it's not a lot of nuance to his game in terms of game speed. Since he's not a guy that has burners, yes, he's deceptively quick. Again, that football speed that I mentioned. But he's a guy that's playing one pace the entire time, right? Maybe two paces, right, when it comes to trying to break in and out. But even then, you're talking about him going even slower. It's not a sudden stop and go or anything of that nature. And then he also ends up still standing tall when he's coming out of a lot of his breaks and stuff anyway. So again, not the route running aficionado out there, but this is definitely a guy that has some plus ability, right? And stick him on a practice squad, see what ultimately ends up becoming of him. But I'm pretty excited, right? When you want to talk about the quarterbacks being able to pick their guys, AJ Martinez in the midst of a pretty exciting QB3 battle, considering where we've come from in a lot of these years. So if he ends up being AJ Martinez's guy, I think both of their skill sets married together creates a pretty good complement, and you could see Brandon Smith continue to ball out into the preseason and hopefully lock himself into a roster spot on the practice squad. But let me know what you guys think, and I'll catch you again. Peace.